before the homework, let me review the chapter 9. In chapter 9, we discussed the hypothesis test. The textbook gave us 6 steps. Step number 1, we state the hypothesis. And we have a null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. And the second step, to determine the alpha. The alpha was the significance level. And step number 3, we take a test statistic. We took the z with the sigma, or we took the t with the sample standard deviation. And step 4, we find a p-value or the critical value. When we had the z with the sigma, then we found the p-value from the z table. But we took the t with the s, then we took the critical value from the t table. So we made the decision rule. We make the decision. If the p-value is less than or equal to the alpha, then reject the null hypothesis. But if the critical value is greater than, the test statistic. The test statistic is bigger than the critical value. We take the absolute value because sometimes we have a left tail or a right tail. So in general, we take the absolute value of the test statistic. And if it is that's greater than critical value, then we reject it, the null hypothesis. And finally, step 6, we made a conclusion. Yeah, I can, it's a conclusion. Okay, so by the 5 steps, we did the hypothesis test, but it's before we had only one sample. One population and one sample. But now in chapter 10, the chapter 10, we are going to have 2 samples. That means we are going to have 2 populations and 2 samples. But we are going to apply, it's almost the same, the 6 steps on the 2 samples. That is a topic in chapter 10. And additionally, we discussed how can we use the z-score and the t-score. It's 2 parts. When you look at the textbook, it's actually, the textbook has 2 parts. One is the z and the other one is a t. But now in chapter 10, we are not going to use the z-score. We only use the t-score and critical value to make the decision. Okay, because it's almost the same. As you saw, the z-test and t-test in chapter 9, one sample, that is almost the same. So now in chapter 10, we are going to ignore the z-test, but we just focus on the t-test. Okay? Okay, so let me look at the homeworks. See, in this homework, it's just ask you only the step number 1. Only the step number 1, I mean the step is number 1 to state the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Actually, now we have 2 populations. Now we have 2 populations. It's a population number 1 and the population number 2. So we have 2 means, the mu1 and mu2. So in the null, we just state there is a mu1 is equal to mu2. And the alternative one, here is a mu1, mu2. And same, we have a 3 statement. It's a not equal to, it's a greater than, or less than. The not equal to, that will be two-tailed again. And the greater than is a right-tailed. And the less than is a left-tailed one. That is the same thing. So as like as the statement in chapter 9, similarly, we are going to state the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. But please remember, in chapter 10, we have the 2 groups. So the sample number 1, we take, from the population number 1, we take sample number 1. And from the population number 2, we are going to take another sample. It's a number 2. So always we have 2 means, the mu1 and mu2. But still, we have a two-tailed and right-tailed, left-tailed. So in number 2, just a second. Let me erase something. Yeah, see? Here is the comparing. Here is the compare the 2 means. It's one from the population number 1 and the other one is from the population number 2. But can you see here? It's a differ from. So because of that, because the key, the differ from, it must be, it's a not equal to. But always in the null, yeah, we have to sign the equal sign. Okay, and the not equal to, that will be the two-tailed. Okay, it's the same thing. Let me try the next one, number 3. Number 3, population, the mean of the population, that is the mu1, is greater than the mean of the population number 2, is a mu2. It's greater than mu2. That will be alternative hypothesis. So here's a greater than, but in the null, it's always the equal sign. Then it's greater than, that will be the right tail. Okay? And how about the number 4? It's a number 4 less than, it's equal in the null, that will be left tail. So the difference is we had 2 population means, but it's always the equal sign in the null and alternative one. There is 3 kinds of the inequalities, but depends on the claim, you can choose is one of them. So that is almost the same. And now in number 5, in chapter 7, chapter 8, in chapter 8, yeah, we discussed the confidence interval for the mu. But now in chapter 10, yes, we are going to discuss the confidence interval as well for the mean difference. Before in chapter 8, 9, we had only 1 sample. So because of that, we have only 1 population mean. But now we have 2 populations. So we are going to discuss is another interval estimation for the mean difference. Okay, so it's a number 5 and number 6. it is about the confidence interval, the interpretation of the confidence interval for the difference. For the difference is between mu1 and minus mu2. Okay, so let me summarize here. Before, in chapter 8, we discussed the confidence interval for one population mean. And chapter 9, we discussed the testing for the one population mean, right? So chapter 8 and chapter 9 is only based on one population mean and one sample. But now in chapter 10, we are going to discuss the confidence interval and the testing procedures for the mean difference. Because even I stated the null hypothesis as a mu1 is equal to mu2, but if I do minus the mu2 there, and this is cancel out, then I can modify the null hypothesis as a mu1 minus mu2. So we just test if the difference will be 0. So as basically now we focus on the difference, and we are going to discuss how can we make the confidence interval and how can we do the test again. But we did chapter 8 for the confidence interval, chapter 9 the test when we had only one group. But now what? 2 groups. That is only the difference. So we are going to just repeat the chapter 8 and chapter 9 when we have 2 groups. That is the topics in chapter 10.